There are places in Texas where nature keeps its secrets particularly well. The state's national parks, lakes, and canyons are known not only for their beauty, but also for strange disappearances that remain unexplained even years later. Today, we will tell you 3 real stories that happened in different parts of Texas, where people literally disappeared in seconds, leaving behind only inexplicable clues and questions that no one has been able to answer. The first was James Coleman, a young man vacationing with a friend in the Big Ticket Nature Reserve in May 1987. A mysterious pillar of light in the sky and James's subsequent disappearance without a trace continue to spark debate and speculation to this day. Then, there is the story of Tommy and Lisa Green, a young couple who went on vacation to Lake Whitney in June 2004. Their empty boat and unlocked car with the keys in the ignition were all that remained of what was supposed to be a simple getaway in nature. Finally, there is the story of Karen Smith, who disappeared in August 1995 in a matter of moments while hiking on a mountain trail in Guadalupe Mountains National Park, leaving behind only her backpack and the absolute silence that enveloped her friends and rescuers. In May 1987, 22-year-old James Coleman and his friend Patrick went on a short vacation to the Big Thicket National Forest in eastern Texas. The idea was simple: get out of the city for a couple of days, pitch a tent under the trees, and enjoy a leisurely vacation in the heart of the wilderness. The place was famous for its dense forest thickets, unexpected swampy areas, and unique ecosystem. The friends had discussed the trip many times, but it wasn't until early May that they decided the weather was right. Not too muggy yet, and the summer heat hadn't taken over. When they arrived by car at the entrance to the reserve, the sun was already setting. Choosing one of the clearings near the dirt road, where a few tourists usually stopped, the friends found a relatively flat spot for their tent. Everything looked normal. They laid out their gear, checked their sleeping bags and food supplies. Nothing seemed to foreshadow trouble. According to Patrick's recollection, James looked inspired. He loved such outings, especially after intense work in the city. As they were setting up the tent, a strange pillar of light suddenly flashed in the sky, or a bright flash, as if lightning had struck, but there was no thunder. Both friends froze for a moment. The sky was quiet, and as far as they could tell, there were no clouds. "Is that some kind of natural light?" Patrick wondered. James just shrugged, saying that it might be a rare atmospheric phenomenon, and that they should seize the moment. But the glow lasted no more than a minute, then disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. The friends discussed what they had seen for a short time and decided that it was probably an optical illusion, or a rare light effect. They continued to settle in, soon built a small fire, had a modest supper, and went to sleep in the same tent. During the night, Patrick woke up to rustling and noises from the forest, a common occurrence in the local wilderness. James seemed to be sleeping peacefully, but in the early morning before dawn, Patrick discovered that his friend was not in the tent. The sleeping bag was unfolded and empty. He naively hoped. Maybe he went to relieve himself or decided to take a walk to the stream. Patrick called out to James, but there was no answer. He waited until dawn broke and went outside. The place was quiet. There were no traces of where his friend could have gone. Their car was still there. All their equipment was in place, except for some of James's clothes. Patrick searched the nearby bushes. No one was there. He felt as if his friend had stepped out for just a minute but never returned. Agitated and confused, Patrick decided to go to the only forest ranger station he knew of, located at the entrance to the reserve. He walked quickly along the country road. It was about 2 kilometers to the station. There he found the ranger on duty and explained the situation in a confused manner. In 1987, they didn't have cell phones in their pockets, so all emergency calls were made either by radio or through landlines in the forestry office. The ranger quickly raised the alarm, notified the county police, and by noon a team arrived for an initial search. 2 or 3 officers, Patrick, and a couple of local volunteers. According to the participants, everything looked strange at first glance. There were no signs of a struggle or trampled soil. The dogs brought to the scene first picked up James's scent from his belongings left in the tent, but quickly lost it just a few meters from the camp. It was as if the man had taken a few steps and vanished into thin air. One of the first assumptions was, maybe he fell into a shallow swamp or quicksand. However, there were no fresh breaks in the vegetation or signs of submerged feet, and the water nearby was not that deep. Although the forest is capable of concealing things, such a silent disappearance at night, in calm weather, puzzled everyone. Over the next day, the search intensified. They combed the forest square by square, calling out to James and waiting for a response. There was no sound, no alarm signal. James's relatives rushed in from another state, begging them to continue and expand the search radius. But although the area was dense with thickets, it did not look impassable. It seemed that there must be at least a scrap of clothing or a footprint in the damp soil. However, there was nothing. No campfire, no new shelter in the thicket. On the third or fourth day of the search, an unexpected discovery caused everyone to tremble with excitement. A few dozen meters from the camp, in a small thicket, they found James's clothes neatly folded. There were pants, a t-shirt, socks, everything folded almost in a pile, with no visible damage. The strangest thing was that they had searched this area dozens of times during the first few days. How could this pile of clothes have just lain there and gone unnoticed? The rangers and volunteers swore in bewilderment that they had not seen anything like it there, so someone had brought them there later? But why would they undress in the bushes? And where were they now? The dog sniffed at the clothes again, but after a couple of steps, it shook its nose, unable to pick up the scent. It was as if the clothes had been planted there on purpose. Despite this discovery, James was not found that day or the following days. Within a week, the search parties were exhausted, with no results. The organizers of the operation, namely the local police and the Reserve Administration, decided to suspend the large-scale search. There are no new clues. It's pointless to continue. His relatives were in shock. They tried to search the trails on their own and question random tourists, but to no avail. Rumors about the young man's disappearance were rife with speculation. Some talked about a strange glow in the sky, which Patrick remembered. Others hinted at criminals, but there were no signs of a struggle or robbery, and although James's belongings had been found, it was unlikely that a thief would have planted them there. Why would they? Perhaps wild animals had dragged him away, but then his clothes would not have been neatly folded. In the end, nothing else came to light. The Texas newspapers wrote about the mysterious disappearance for a couple of weeks, and Patrick gave several interviews, mentioning the glow from the night before. We definitely saw a strange pillar of light, but I don't know if it's connected to James's disappearance. The police filed the case as a missing person without suspicion of foul play because there was no evidence of a violent disappearance. James's parents tried everything to get the search reopened, but by the end of the summer of 1987, nothing new had been found in the vicinity of Big Ticket. James Coleman remained on the missing persons list. His body was never found, and there were no signs of his presence in the woods outside the campsite. Patrick returned home and spent the rest of his life haunted by the thought that he could have prevented his son's disappearance if he had woken up on time. Local rangers admitted in private conversations that this was one of the strangest episodes of their careers. No one saw James leave the camp. No one heard any noise. And yet a few days later, his belongings were found neatly arranged in the bushes as if someone had placed them there. So this story, which took place in May 1987 in the Big Ticket Reserve, is still being passed around among tourists and lovers of mysterious disappearances. Some consider it a classic example of the genre. A man disappears, and after a while his belongings turn up, without giving any clue as to where he went. And, as if to mock us, the missing person never reappears. The forest remains silent, and we can only guess what happened that night after the strange light phenomenon that the friends saw in the sky. The police closed the active phase of the investigation long ago, and the parents received no answers, only pain and confusion. Many years later, the case of James Coleman remains open, but without any new leads, and it may well remain one of those mysteries buried in the thick undergrowth and silence of Big Ticket at night. In June 2004, Whitney Lake, located on the border of central Texas, was breathing hot days and moonlit nights. During this season, the shores usually come alive. Families come for picnics, fishermen sit on the piers, and fresh air enthusiasts go boating. This is where 25-year-olds Tommy and Lisa Green went for the weekend, to get away from the city noise and spend a couple of days in the open air. They had been married for only a year and were full of plans and dreams. According to conversations with acquaintances, the couple wanted to spend the night by the lake and rent a boat in the morning to take a trip on the calm water. Neither of them were professional fishermen, but Lisa loved to photograph the lake's expanses, and Tommy was just happy to get away from it all. The next morning, as the heat was just picking up, some tourists driving around the lake noticed a car, an old Toyota sedan, parked not too far from the water. Both doors were wide open and the keys were left in the ignition. This was puzzling in itself. It was unlikely that anyone would voluntarily leave a car in such a condition. When the witnesses approached to check, they suddenly saw a map of the area on the hood. It showed the outline of Whitney Lake and the surrounding roads, and in one place there was a clear cross, as if someone had marked a specific spot on the northern bay or a branch of the lake. Perhaps this indicated the point where Tommy and Lisa intended to go. The random tourists tried to call out to the car's owners but heard no response. There was complete silence, only the breeze rustling the grass and the car doors creaking. It was clear that something was wrong. One couple called the Rangers, who arrived around noon, and that was the start of the search for Tommy and Lisa Green. At that point, little was known about the disappearance. Neither friends nor relatives had reported them missing. But the fact that the keys were left in the car with the doors open was already alarming. The Rangers and local police officers examined the car and found some personal belongings: a couple of bottles of water, Tommy's wallet with documents, and Lisa's purse, but no money, which she had obviously taken with her. The keys in the ignition suggested that the couple had no intention of leaving for long. Judging by the minimal luggage, they had only planned a short trip. But why didn't they lock the car? Some thought maybe they were going to come back quickly, not fearing theft, since people are constantly coming and going in a tourist area. To clarify the details, an initial search was organized in the evening. A group of volunteers and rangers walked along the lakeshore in both directions, questioning vacationers. No one remembered seeing Tommy and Lisa, at least not a couple matching that description. Although the night before, several fishermen had mentioned seeing two young people asking about renting a boat. But witnesses were not sure that they were talking about the Greens. What was known was that there was an old pier in that area where boats could occasionally be rented from a private owner. But if Tommy and Lisa did take a boat, why wasn't it listed in the records? Perhaps they had made a private, informal arrangement. The next day brought an even bigger surprise. A mile from where the car was parked, an empty boat was found in the morning, neatly moored to a small ledge on the shore. This seemed even more absurd. The boat looked completely empty, with no life jackets or fishing gear. Inside were just a couple of old blankets, no documents or personal belongings. It seemed as if the owner or owners had simply gone ashore and not returned. The boat was in good condition, with little wear and tear, but it had no number or registration marks, which is sometimes the case with owners of old boats living near the lake. The police decided that Tommy and Lisa might have borrowed it from someone, but even if it was their boat, where were they? Why did they leave it there and not return to their car? Tommy's parents, hearing from acquaintances that his car was abandoned at Whitney Lake, immediately arrived at the scene. They knew that their son had planned to spend the weekend in the countryside with his wife Lisa, but they had no idea that the couple had chosen this particular spot. They had mentioned something about a different campsite. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, the police announced the start of a search and rescue operation. Volunteers, local rangers, and county police were called in. The area was flown over in a rented helicopter, and the lake's shoreline was checked to see if there were any two figures. Local residents were questioned, but no one had seen when or how Tommy and Lisa had arrived, or who they had spoken to, if anyone. The weather was hot, but dry. The water in the lake was warm, and the depth varied from place to place. If they had drowned, why had no one heard any cries or noticed any noise? And the boat was moored, which meant that people could have gotten ashore. Dogs brought in by dog handlers picked up the scent from clothes found in the trunk of the car, but were unable to follow the trail along the shore. The scent was lost after a few dozen meters. The lack of clues in the vast area of the lake made the task difficult. A search by divers also began, but with no one able to indicate the exact location of the dive, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Day after day, the tension grew. The official number of people involved reached several dozen, and the result was 0. No bodies, no signs of violence. The car and an empty boat suggested that the couple had gone for a short boat trip and disappeared. The route was unclear. The theory that they left voluntarily is absurd since the car was still there and their belongings had not been taken. The parents did not believe that their son could have staged his own disappearance. Was it a crime? Had they been kidnapped by someone unknown? But how in broad daylight at a popular lake frequented by fishermen and tourists? And why leave the car with the keys in the ignition and the boat tied to the shore? The search continued for a week, sometimes interrupted due to a lack of new information. The local population eventually realized that this was yet another case of people disappearing near Whitney Lake, where the water can swallow anyone. But if it had been a simple drowning, bodies or some belongings would have surfaced, t-shirts, shoes, etc. The lake is not very deep around its perimeter, and in some places if someone drowns, the body is found within the first few days. But here there was nothing. The police investigation has not yielded any new leads. Lisa's parents also arrived, trying to remember something. It seems that the cross on the map, lying on the hood, was made by Tommy or Lisa. It points to a certain area of the lake, possibly according to rumors, where the fishing is good or the view is beautiful. But then, why was the boat moored a mile away from the car? It is believed that they may have gone into the water closer to the cross to look at something and then, for some unknown reason, did not return. But still, there are no bodies, no conflict, no eyewitness reports. In the end, the official search was suspended and they were both formally listed as missing. Among lovers of mysterious stories, this disappearance was widely discussed. A couple arrives, leaves their car unlocked, a map on the hood, the boat is empty, and the people vanish. Some doubt that the story is true, but the car and boat are real facts from police reports, so something definitely happened. Rumors spread. Some talked about a whirlpool or underwater vortex at the spot marked with a cross, which could have sucked people in silently, but this is usually unrealistic. Others suggested that someone had attacked the couple, taken them away, and simply abandoned the boat, but there was no noise or struggle and no witnesses. In the end, the case of Tom and Lisa Green became one of those stories that people later say, they just disappeared in a couple of minutes, leaving their car and boat behind as if nothing had happened. Mystery enthusiasts add that Whitney Lake can be deceptive, with underwater caves, currents, and sometimes strange occurrences rooted in the legends of indigenous tribes. Common sense suggests that the couple must have drowned or gone somewhere, but why were they never found, even years later? No bones or clothing have ever surfaced, and all of their equipment remained in the boat. Located on the western edge of Texas, Guadalupe Mountains National Park attracts travelers with its majestic landscapes, towering ridges, rocky cliffs, and plains that gradually give way to desert. It was to this place that a group of 4 friends set off on August 14, 1995, among them 31-year-old Karen Smith, a woman who had long been in love with mountain trails and was ready to spend any free day in search of new beauty. That Monday, their destination was the Pinnacles Trail, popular with experienced hikers. The trail itself is not difficult, but it still requires a certain level of physical fitness and caution due to the high-altitude climate and sometimes steep drops in elevation. The weather was clear from the morning, and by 10 o'clock the sun was already beating down. The group, led by a trekking enthusiast named Russell, moved along the trail at a moderate pace. They hoped to reach the viewpoint by noon, take a short break, and then return downhill before the evening coolness set in. Karen, as her friends recalled, always walked closer to the middle of the group, sometimes stopping to take pictures of particularly striking views or wipe the sweat from her brow. But that day, everything seemed perfectly normal. No one noticed any signs of illness or anything unusual about her. After climbing one of the longer sections, her friends stopped to catch their breath and drink some water. Karen said something like, "I need to rest in the shade for a minute, then I'll catch up with you," and walked behind a rock formation, where, according to her, it was slightly cooler. As Megan's friend later said, "We were literally a few meters away. We saw her sit down and put her backpack on her knees." The others decided to go a little further, a couple of turns along the trail, to choose a place to rest. Karen asked them not to wait for her. "I'll be right there, just a couple of minutes." Megan turned around after a while, expecting Karen to appear, but there was no one there. It was as if the girl had vanished into thin air in the time it took the group to walk 50 meters along the trail. Hearing no cries or noises, her friends returned to the place where Karen had been sitting, but there was no one there. They walked around whispering her name, calling out to her, but there was no answer. At first they assumed that Karen had simply followed them but stopped a little further up the trail or had gone off to take pictures without telling them. But after searching around for a couple of minutes, they didn't see any traces of her. Soon one of the guys, Lauren, shouted, "Look, it's her backpack!" It was lying just below the trail, as if thrown at the foot of a bush. Inside were water, a wallet, and some personal items. Why did she leave her backpack if she was just going to take a short break? Why didn't she even take any water in the heat? Her friends ran around nervously, thinking she was nearby. After about half an hour of fruitless searching, realizing that she wasn't responding, Megan ran down to where their cars were parked to find the rangers. By noon, the cries and whistles of the rescue team searching for Karen Smith could be heard all along the Pinnacles Trail. The next 2 days saw extensive search and rescue operations in the area around the trail. Although the terrain around the Pinnacles is dry, it is littered with boulders, cliffs, and crevices. The sun was blazing, with temperatures rising to 35 degrees Celsius during the day and dropping at night. If Karen had suffered heat stroke, she needed urgent help. However, the dog handlers who searched the trail and surrounding areas were unable to pick up a clear scent. They picked up a scent at the spot where the backpack was found, but it led in an uncertain direction. The county police, volunteers, and several helicopters were called in to search the area from above. Unfortunately, there was nothing. No rustling, no traces of clothing or broken bushes that would indicate the route of the fall. Karen's parents, who arrived a day later, could not believe that their daughter, always cautious and not prone to risky ventures, could disappear in broad daylight in a matter of minutes. There were no signs that she had fallen or slipped. There were no cliffs nearby, and any cracks had been examined. In addition, other tourists had been walking along the trail that day and had not seen anyone sliding down. No signs of violence or struggle were found. The person disappeared so quickly and silently, it was as if they had stepped into another dimension. After a week of fruitless searches, the rangers suspended the active phase of the search. Karen's relatives refused to give up for a long time, hiring private investigators and distributing flyers. But for about a month, there was no news. By the middle of the summer of 1995, the commotion that had followed the tourist's disappearance had almost died down in Guadalupe Mountains Park, and only her friends and family continued to wonder, where is she? Officially, the case was called Missing Causes and Circumstances Unknown. Some people in the corridors of power called it one of the most inexplicable cases ever. In the presence of a group of friends, on a clearly visible trail, in clear weather, with no signs of a cliff or violent activity, in just a couple of minutes, a girl disappears, and even large search teams cannot find her. What happened in the Texas forests and canyons? Why do people disappear without a trace in a matter of moments, leaving behind only mysterious objects and inexplicable circumstances? If you liked these stories, like them, subscribe to our channel and be sure to click the bell to be the first to know about new, mysterious incidents in Texas and elsewhere. Leave comments with your theories. Maybe you'll find the answers that investigators have been searching for so long. Until next time, take care and stay alert. Hey.